Welcome to Tanakh Talk. I am your host, William Hall, coming to you live from Kingsland, Texas, USA, once again for episode number 4 with Rabbi Michael Skobac on a brand new, almost 4 episodes in, brand new show. A rabbi cross-examines the New Testament. And coming to you live from Canada, Rabbi Michael Skobac, ready to just rock and roll and pour some unbelievable knowledge and wisdom into all of us. And he's coming to us free of charge. Well, not quite, because it's costing his time. But we get to look at that magnificent library, one of the 4 he has in his castle he lives in. So
it's a man cave.
That's a great man cave. That's a great man cave. Rabbi Michael Skobac, boy, what a joy and a pleasure to have you here, sir.
So great to be here with you again.
How are you this week? How was your week?
Good. I'm recovered from Purim.
Awesome.
Yeah, and ready to go, ready to dive into the text with you.
That is great. I forgot to turn my screen on. See, you know what, Pete, if you're watching this, brother, you can tell right now my multitasking skills are nil. So, I need to get you here as often as I can. Rabbi, we need to come up with some sort of cool teleportation device so he can like zip over here and then be back in his kitchen in Georgetown in like 2 seconds. Hi. Wow. It's funny because we actually have had so much time today, Rabbi, just playing with different things because everything's already set up now, and still at the very last minute, I got distracted. Oh my goodness gracious.
Okay.
Wow.
It's always an adventure.
It is. It really, really is. And the thing about it is it's nice to have it all professional and everything so Hollywoodish, but I never want to really take away from that real effect of life, and I think there's a part of me that kind of likes to see the natural part of this show, let the bloopers and the bleeps get in there, and just kind of see what it's really like in the studios, and even where you're at. So, most people don't realize that the Holy Spirit just visited you in a blue ray of light,
Yeah, we had to get rid of him. I can bring it back, by the way.
Yeah, I think you said you probably should during the number picking.
Yes. I'll make sure we pick the right person.
Yeah. Oh, goodness gracious. Wow. What a week. What a week. Well, I'll tell you what, it's been a busy day for us here. I've spent, had a major change of plans. I had to do a pretty big overhaul on our property because I've been in construction. So we have a lot of, when I finish with the job, I take these parts and I kind of neatly stack them until I can get to a point to either get rid of them or simply just dispose of them. And through the winter, it kind of built up. And so this morning I decided it was time to just take a half a day and just terrorize through the whole entire property, grabbing anything that didn't look good, throw it on the trailer.
Well, John Wayne said, a man's got to do what a man's got to do.
But that's the dagger I see. Oh my gosh, I can't believe it. I've been talking with these funky voices for so long, I can't do John Wayne anymore.
Okay.
I used to do John Wayne. You know who somebody said I did really good one time? Was Sean Connery.
We'll have to get you and Jason's spiritual babies together for that one.
Oh, Jason is such a hoot to watch. I love watching him, man. It's such a sweet spirit, no doubt. Cool. Well, Rabbi, are we going to try to tackle chapter 2 today?
Yeah, we may even finish it.
Wow.
If we can fly, we can finish. Maybe.
Well, let me downsize my screen here, and I am going to let me make sure I don't have any notes saying you're not live. What happened? No, everything looks good. Okay, that's good. So I'm going to pull up on my end. I'm going to pull up my Bible. That way when you misquote the scriptures and I have to put you in check. I was told that last week whenever I was reading the part where Jesus said it was kind of the metaphor that he was giving, or the analogy. And he said, for any of those who do not want to worship me, it says, bring them before me and slay them before me. And then I got accused of misquoting scripture and or the New Testament. And so whenever I showed it to them, it was kind of like, it was an eye opener, I actually had a guy, I won't mention his name. A lot of people out there already know who he is, but in the Messianic Circle who came to my house after I made it public that I was no longer part of the New Testament. And he he came to save me. And it was really interesting because he set me down at the table. My wife and my children were home. We had a table sitting in the living room, right off of the kitchen. I mean, literally, you could almost reach over and touch the kitchen counter from where we were sitting. And he tried persuading me back into the Messianic side. But he wouldn't ever let me talk. It's like he wanted to tell me stuff, but he didn't want me to present any questions for him. And at the time, I actually did have questions, ones that I wasn't totally sure on, but I was kind of sure. He wouldn't answer any of my questions. And finally, he kept getting more and more upset with me, Rabbi. And his tone was beginning to change, and he started losing his temper. And when he started losing his temper, I just basically kindly told him, I said, we should probably go ahead and end it here because it doesn't look like it's really going anywhere. And he stood up and he just started pointing at me, with that, and not quite screaming, but probably close to a yell, if you could say, and just started hurling curses at me, like godly curses, if you will, in love, of course. And finally, I just told him, I said, you got to go now, Savannah. I just, this isn't getting anywhere. So we walked to the front door. And then he started, by the time we made it to the front door, keep in mind, my wife and my son are literally probably about 4 arms distances from where we're standing. They could very easily hear all the stuff. David was getting nervous, and he went and was kind of hiding behind his mama. And this guy proceeded to yell curses at me. And when he got to the door, he was so upset that you could actually see little saliva coming out of his mouth from his spitting and his yelling and his screaming at this point. And he looked at me and he pointed at me like this right here. He says, if this was in the days of Phinehas, he goes, I would take a spear and drive it through you and your wife. My wife and my son are like right there listening to all this stuff. And he took out of there. And I'm thinking to myself, I said, you know what? If this is really what that whole cycle is all about, I really don't want to have anything to do with it. And then, so a couple months later, I read that verse where it said, Jesus said, bring them before me and slay them. I was thinking, wait a minute. I almost said his name. I got to call this guy back up and apologize. He had grounds for doing what he did. Technically, it was nerve wracking. I can't believe these people that would actually come into my home and really just, I did not at any point in time, I need to make this clear, I never felt threatened in the sense of him physically doing it, but the fact that he would come and actually do that in front of my wife and child, that was just, really was a strange moment in time.
It sounds like his, extreme reaction to you showed that he was threatened by you. So you may not have felt threatened by him physically, but I think that his hysteria and his histrionics really betray the fact that you made him nervous. And, I think Shakespeare would have said, methinks the missionary dost protest too much. I think that's how Shakespeare would have put it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that that season, very, very glad that season is behind us, because that was just, it was in that cycle, Rabbi, where a lot of people don't know my background. I think me and you talked a little bit, but my background was, raised in a secular adopted household. My biological father was a pastor for many years, and he changed to Messianic, and now he holds the title of Messianic Rabbi. I won't go into any speculation, but anyway, that's his current title. And so when I went from one to the other, it wasn't because I wanted to switch clubs. It's because I was studying and I started seeing problems, and I left one and went into the Messianic side after about 15 years. And then I stayed in the Messianic side for about 3 or 4 years, studying the whole time, not just hanging out, going to these, events and just visiting people. But spent that time literally studying like 6-7 hours a day. And that's what led me to where I'm at now. But what's really funny, apparently I'm the most ignorant one of them out there, because they say that all my studying has led me astray. So go figure that one out. Interesting. Very interesting. Well,
yeah, ignorance can sometimes be blissful, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, indeed. So to all you people out there, Rabbi, what kind of advice would you just throw at some of these people like me, somebody who has been dealing with family members who are shunning you now, and friends who are literally driving you off the edge, telling you you've fallen from grace, all these things that there's no hope between you and God. You're cursed now. What's a good word of encouragement for these people?
Yeah, I think that, it's a matter of staying strong and being clear. And the clearer you are about what you know and what you believe, the calmer you are, the more focused, the more centered you are. And you're able to really model, uh, you know, um, someone who is pretty certain of where they are. They're not threatened by others. So that what you describe with someone who you could see is not clear about what he believes because something that's different threatened him.
Sure.
So I think that if you can, um, focus on clarifying and getting clear on what you know to be true and why you know it to be true, and not having to beat people over the head with it, but just live it and be a light and be patient with people and realize that in the proper time, people will come to that light. People will come to that truth. But I think sometimes the more, sort of aggressive people are in trying to convince others of what they believe, it to me is not effective. I think that the most important thing to do is to stay true to our own path and to strengthen ourselves on our own path and to be patient with others, be loving, and to model what it is that we believe and to be, really an example of someone who is clear and someone who's connected to truth and to, again, keep ourselves and everyone else in our prayers and with the understanding that God has revealed to us the end of the story. The Tanakh is very clear in teaching that one day the truth of the Torah will become known to the whole world. And so when you have that knowledge, when you understand that the end of the story has been written already, and that, as the prophet Zechariah says, one day 10 people from every nation of the world are going to grab hold of a Jew, and they're going to say, please, we want to follow you because we know that God is with you. So it's just a question of how long that's going to take. It's not in our hands.
Mm-hmm.
And what we can do to hasten that is to, again, just be as clear a light as possible. And we know that the clearer that light is and the more loving that light is shined, the sooner it is that people will come to it. So I think that's a general prescription. I think that everyone's personal situation is different. And I'm happy to discuss. If anyone wants to get into a personal discussion, they can write to me, Facebook, me, we can talk about it.
Sounds like a game plan. I'll tell you what, it's good to have people, somebody, friend, rabbi, someone at your side, close by, whether it's a set of books. I mean, like Rabbi Singer's got this fabulous book set that I keep with me. I'm pushing Rabbi Skobac to start his book set. Hopefully he'll be able to do that soon. Rabbi, do you have any plans for any kind of books?
Yeah. There's a number of things that are in the works, and God willing, one of these days you'll be able to see some stuff in print as well.
That would be fantastic. That would be fantastic. Okay. Well, I'm getting excited. This is episode 4. And that includes a repeat of episode 3 because I was having some technical issues here. So realistically, with 5 weeks with Rabbi Skobac, and we are just starting Matthew chapter 2. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Finally. Finally.
Whenever you messaged me, whenever we was messaging back, are you ready for Wednesday? And you said chapter 2. I was like, 2? Really? We're actually going to do this? Yes. That's good. Okay. So I'm going to pull up Matthew 2. I keep hearing these bells. Oh,
yeah. It sounds like we have some kind of chimes in the background.
That's funny. He's still sending me this. Okay. Let me read this because this involves your camera screen. Okay. Rabbi, can you pull your camera down? I think it kind of drifted up some. Tiny bit more, just a hair more. perfect. Yes, that looks great. Plus,
Okay.
now I get to see more of your books. Do you really have four libraries?
Yeah, at least 4 in this house. Yeah.
Do you have 4 rooms in your house? How big is this house to have 4 libraries?
It's not a huge house, but I have
A lot of books.
a lot of books. Yeah, and
Wow.
I have another library at my office as well. Yeah, I'm just a book fiend.
That's really cool. My wife is too. She's got she just had me put up shelves in our master bedroom to go around the ceiling that have more of her books and stuff, and we got some in the office as well. But it's so she would love to see your library. That is for certain.
Okay, you got an open invitation.
Hey, I'll be up in Canada. What's for dinner? Okay. All right, I'm
So
going
ready to rock and roll.
Yes, sir. I believe so. Okay. So Matthew chapter 2. Everybody, for all you people who are watching, you can call in if you want to. 855-952-4253. That's 855-95-BIBLE. You can call in, please, if you have questions to ask about Matthew chapter 2. That's going to be our focal point. So if you got questions on Matthew chapter 3, wait till next 6 weeks until we get there. I'm just kidding. Next week we should be there because this will be a good quick evening. Okay, as far as getting through the full chapter. So here we go. We're starting off now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem. Rabbi, what do you got?
Yeah, so we begin this chapter. We covered last week the birth of Jesus, the whole episode of the virgin birth myth. And Matthew begins the second chapter by saying that after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, we're told that it was in the days of Herod, who was the king. We're told that wise men, the word usually is Magi, from the east came to Jerusalem. Now, this is not a term that we're familiar with from the Tanakh, from the Hebrew scriptures, so it's not really clear who are these Magi, who are these people. And, the word in the Greek translation of the book of Daniel, chapter 2, has them as magicians or wizards or astrologers. And there's a passage in Acts chapter 13, verse 8, where apparently it could be applied to someone who's a sorcerer. So what's interesting is that right at the beginning of the Jesus story, the people that seem to be drawn to him are not people that are Bible people, but they're people who are doing exactly what the Bible prohibits, which is astrology and sorcery. Okay. So it is sort of a strange introduction to the chapter. And they say, where is he? They come to Jerusalem and they're asking, where is he who has been born king of the Jews? Now we know, of course, that no one is born king of the Jews.
Right.
You can be born into the kingly family, the line of David, but no one is born the king. You have to be anointed as the king as a mature person. And I don't think that we imagine that an infant or a 6-year-old is going to be anointed as the king. But they say that they know that the king of the Jews has been born. They want to know, where is he? And they say, we've seen his star in the east. That's hard to understand. What does it mean that we've seen his star in the east? Some people reference this to Numbers 24:17, which is not really speaking about a celestial body star. It's really speaking, it's the term star there is referring to the Messiah himself. So it's not easy to understand what they mean by seeing an actual star in the east, and we'll come to this in a few moments again. But they say, we've come to worship him. Now that raises our ears, it perks our ears up, because the question is the Messiah supposed to be worshipped? We see that in the Tanakh. So we know that in the Hebrew scriptures, in the Tanakh, only God is to be worshipped.
Sure.
And worshiping or giving our devotion to anyone or anything else is idolatry. And one of the things that's very clear in the Tanakh is that the Messiah is not God. We see, for example, in Isaiah chapter 11, we're told that the Messiah will be someone who himself fears God. The Messiah will be a God-fearing person. We know that throughout the Tanakh, the scriptures speak about the Messiah as not being God, as someone separate from God, other than God. For example, in Hosea chapter 3, verse 5, in Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 9, in Ezekiel chapter 34, they speak about God and the Messiah. Not God the Messiah, but God and the Messiah.
Got it.
We know there are several passages where Scripture specifically says God is not a man. We know that's in Numbers 23, verse 19. We know that's in chapter 11, verse 9 of Hosea, that God is God and not a man. We know that in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 35, we're told that God actually revealed himself to us at Mount Sinai, and any understanding, any concept of God that was not revealed to us, that was not shown to us specifically at Sinai, is defined as idolatry. That's why you'll find in Deuteronomy chapter 13, they speak about idolatry as the worship of a God that your fathers did not know, a God that you did not know. And so the only God that we are to focus our attention to and devotion to is the God that was revealed to us, the God that showed himself to us at Mount Sinai. And at Mount Sinai, no one saw a human form. No one saw Jesus. No one saw Trinity. So it's very clear in the Tanakh, at least, that the Messiah is not God and that we're not supposed to be worshiping the Messiah. The question is, what does the New Testament teach? Does the New Testament actually teach that Jesus is God? And I think there are three possibilities. One possibility would be that the Greek scriptures, the New Testament, clearly teaches that Jesus is God. That's one possibility. The other possibility would be that the New Testament teaches clearly that Jesus is not God, meaning that you'd have one or the other stated or taught definitively and clearly. The third possibility is that there are mixed signals in the Christian Bible. And it seems to me that's probably what we're dealing with. I think that the simplest proof of this is that for the past 2,000 years, Christians themselves, meaning the people who follow the New Testament, have been fighting over this very question for 2,000 years. So the fact that it's been argued about for so long, it just proves one thing, that it's not clear. If the information was clear, you wouldn't have 2,000 years of internal Christian debating. When it comes to the Jewish concept of God, Jewish people were clear that God is one. And so the absolute monotheism of Judaism was never debated amongst Jews because our scriptures were clear about things. But I think we'll find as we go through the New Testament, and we're not going to clear up this topic tonight, we'll leave it as an open question, and we'll discuss the relevant passages that may affect this discussion on either side in the future. But I think it's very clear that there are mixed signals. I think that you'll certainly be able to find many Christians who will point to passages in the New Testament where they feel it teaches clearly that Jesus was God. And you'll have some Christians that will point to other passages that would dispute that. I would say that the weaker case, my personal opinion, the weaker case, even from the New Testament, would be the side which claims that Jesus is God. Because, first of all, many of the passages that are quoted to support that are simply just misunderstood or weak. For example, in John 10, verse 30, where Jesus says, I and the Father are one. Well, is that a definitive proof that Jesus is God? The Greek word there for one, hen, simply means at one. So Jesus is saying that I and God are at one with each other. And that's why we find later on, Jesus says about his own apostles, his own followers, that he's at one with them. No one would equate the apostles with Jesus as being equal to Jesus. So that's an example of one of the proof texts that are used to prove that Jesus is God, and just not a very strong one. Or in John chapter 8, where Jesus says, before Abraham was, I am. Now, that's sort of goofy because just saying I am, even if that was a name of God, would not prove a person was God. I say I am probably 5 times a day. But the Hebrew scriptures don't have God's name as I am that I am, or I am what I am. That's often a mistranslation of the Hebrew. Ehyeh asher ehyeh really means I will be what I will be. So just for Jesus to say I am, obviously is a very, very weak proof that he's God. And then you have so many passages in the New Testament which seem to point in the opposite direction. For example, in Matthew 19, where the young student comes and wants to know how he can have eternal life.
Oh, yes.
And a good teacher, how do I achieve eternal life? And Jesus says, why do you call me good? There's only one good, and that's God.
Sure.
Well, Jesus simply could have said, yeah, you got the right guy. I'm God, and I'm the one you should speak to.
Right.
So he seems to, in many, many passages, differentiate himself from God. He says in John chapter 14, I believe, the Father is greater than I. You see many passages where Jesus prays to God. You see in Matthew 24 where Jesus says that of that day and that hour, no one knows, no man, no angel, only my Father in heaven. So there's information that Jesus does not have that God has. So you have so many passages where the Christian scriptures seem to make it clear that Jesus is not God. But again, I think that the most honest thing to say at this point is it's sort of a mixed bag. And
Sure.
it just, from a Jewish biblical perspective, it's strange to hear this idea that the Messiah is to be worshipped. Now, what I should say, and this is important here, is that the word that's used in this passage here in Matthew, where the Magi speak about wanting to worship Jesus, so it's not really necessarily a word indicating prayer, like they're praying to a divinity, because it's a word that can very much easily refer to an act of showing respect. So, for example, in the Hebrew scriptures, it's the same word that's used for Jacob, who prostrates himself before his brother Esau in Genesis 33, verse 3, or when Joseph's brothers bow to him in Egypt in Genesis 42, 6, and Genesis 43, verse 28, and numerous other places where the same word used here for worship is really a word that means to respect or to prostrate in respect. Doesn't necessarily indicate that it means that we're viewing someone as God himself.
Rabbi, you mentioned something earlier about they couldn't just be born king. They had to be, one of the things you mentioned is they had to be anointed. There's comments that I saw one time on Facebook that I was kind of curious about. And it says that for Jesus to be king, he would have had to been anointed like with oil. Is that true, or did he just have to be anointed, maybe not with oil, maybe just, ordained in, or how does that, how exactly does that fit in? Is it even something to be concerned with?
Well, we're going to get to stories in the Gospels which speak about his potential anointing. We know that the kings in the Hebrew Bible were not all necessarily anointed with oil. We know that Saul was anointed and David was anointed. It seems that, according to, at least, this is not clear in the scriptures, but at least according to the Jewish sages, you didn't have to actually have oil poured on your head if you were a descendant of a king, meaning if your father was a king. Now here, Jesus did not have an earthly father who was a king, so it could be that the future Messiah, because it's been a broken chain already, will have to be physically anointed with oil, and that seems to make sense. But we'll be able to discuss that in greater detail when we get to the stories of the anointing of Jesus, because it is something which the Christian Bible does try to at least substantiate.
When you get there, if you don't mind, when you do get there, we won't do that now, but just whenever you're ready, maybe go over the whole deal with like Melchizedek. I mean, one of the questions was, well,
yeah, that's going to come up. I mean,
as far as him being anointed or anything.
Yeah, that story will come up.
Super.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
awesome.
We go on in verse 3. So the Magi are coming and wanting to know where this king is, and the Matthew goes on to say that when Herod, who was the king, heard this, he was very troubled, and all of Jerusalem with him. Now, it's not hard to understand why Herod would have been troubled, because he's the king,
sure,
and he's now learning that the real king is around, is born. Now, maybe he's not going to get nervous, for a little infant, but just knowing that the Jewish Messiah is born would obviously be troubling to the king, because that means he's going to no longer be in power. But why would it say that all of Jerusalem was troubled with Herod? That's hard to understand. Now, we know that Herod himself was extremely paranoid of anyone who might even possibly challenge his rule. And we know that he actually killed many people in his own family out of his paranoia. He just was so insecure that we can understand why, if he's hearing news about the birth of the Jewish Messiah, he'd be very upset. But why would all of Jerusalem, meaning that all of Jerusalem would be thrilled if the Messiah is here, if there's an announcement of the Messiah that's been born? Although, again, the idea of a Messiah being born is absurd, but it's hard to understand why Matthew says that all of Jerusalem was troubled. Now, it's interesting that later on in Matthew, in chapter 21, verse 10, so we're told that when Jesus entered Jerusalem, it says the city was stirred up. Now, it's not clear what that means, that it was stirred up. It could be positive or negative. And people were saying, who is this? What's strange is that just before this verse in Matthew 21 verse 10, where Matthew says that the whole city was stirred up and people were asking, who is this? It says in verse 8 and 9, just the previous two verses, that as he was coming into Jerusalem, there were throngs, great multitudes of people who were greeting him and saying, Hosanna, the son of David. That is clearly a greeting of people thinking the Messiah is in their presence. So this whole scenario is very hard to understand, where Matthew has literally in one verse great throngs and masses of people coming out and literally greeting Jesus as the Messiah as he's entering Jerusalem, and then one verse later saying that the whole city is stirred up wanting to know, who is this guy?
Right.
So it's a pretty strange passage. In verse 4, Matthew goes on and says, and when he gathered all the chief priests, this is what Herod did. He wanted to gather all the chief priests and scribes of the people together, and he wanted to inquire of them where the Messiah was to be born. So one thing that, again, for people who have a sensitivity to the Hebrew scriptures, there are no such thing as chief priests in the plural. There was only one high priest at any given time. So it's hard to understand why Matthew is speaking about the high priests or the chief priests. There would only be one of them. But Herod, in order to ascertain where this potential threat would be coming from, where is this little baby who was born the Messiah? So he gathers the chief priests and the scribes, and he wants to know where would the Messiah be born? And they said to him, in Bethlehem of Judea. And then they quote, for it's written by the prophet, the prophet Micah, but you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not the least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people, Israel. Now, what's strange about this passage is that it's not really a translation that lines up neatly with either the Hebrew Masoretic text or even with the Greek Septuagint translation of the Hebrew text.
Okay.
So Matthew seems to be making up his own paraphrase or adaptation of the Hebrew text itself.
Now this is Hosea 3? No.
Hosea chapter 5, I believe.
Hosea 5, okay.
Yeah. So the claim here, and this is significant, is that, and we should bear in mind, by the way, that one of the major themes in the book of Matthew is that Matthew, of all the other apostles, all the other gospel writers, Matthew appeals to the Hebrew scriptures more than any other. And so he seems to be trying throughout his gospel to make the point that Jesus fulfilled prophecy from the Hebrew scriptures, meaning that Matthew is taking the approach which says that we can prove that Jesus is the Messiah because he fulfilled Messianic prophecy. Now, this is a technique that was picked up very aggressively by Christian missionaries who make very, very exaggerated claims that, for example, there are 365 prophecies in the Hebrew Bible about the Messiah that Jesus fulfilled.
Right.
You probably know I'm doing a program with John O'Vandor on truth2you.org, where we're actually going through one by one each of these messianic prophecies.
Yes, and you guys are up to like 100 and what are you at now?
We're in Isaiah 53 right now. We're doing a third part tomorrow night.
Yeah, for
third week.
And for those of you guys who don't know about this program, it's really great. It's Jono. Is Jason on there with you guys?
No, it's just Jono and myself.
Just Jono. Okay, and it's truth2you.org.
Yeah, truth2you.org. But we're going through these alleged prophecies. So Matthew is really very invested in this. Matthew was, and we're going to see in this chapter 2 itself, he has several passages where he claims that Jesus fulfilled messianic prophecy. So here, what he's saying is that there was a long-standing prophecy in the Hebrew Bible which says that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem. Now, the truth is that the prophet Micah is not saying that at all. All that the prophet Micah is saying is that the Messiah would be a descendant of King David, and we know that King David was from the city of Bethlehem. Okay. So there's no prophecy where God is pinning himself down and telling us where the Messiah himself has to be born. All that the Hebrew prophets tell us is that the Messiah would be a descendant of David, and David is the Bethlehemite from the city of Bethlehem.
Okay, I misled everybody out there. It's not Hosea, it's Micah. I just heard you.
Micah.
Yeah,
Micah.
It's in Micah. Okay, chapter 5, verse 2. What did I say? I just saw that.
Well,
verse 2.
It depends if you have a Hebrew scriptures or a Christian translation. I think they're one verse off. The pagintation in the Christian and Jewish Bibles is not always exactly the same, but it's in the 5th chapter of Micah. It's not hard to find. Sometimes it's pronounced Micah. And again, what Matthew is asserting is that it's a prophecy which tells you where the Messiah has to be born, and that's simply a misreading of the prophet Micah. He's only telling you that the Messiah would be a descendant of David, who himself was from Bethlehem. The other thing to bear in mind is that it's very clear when you study Micah chapter 5 that this is a prophecy that has not yet been fulfilled. Micah is telling us in this prophecy one of the major features of what would be going on in the world when the Messiah is here, and that is that there'll be an entire new world order of peace throughout the world. And so this passage in Micah is a messianic prophecy, but it's telling us that one of the ways we'll be able to know who the Messiah is that during his lifetime, peace will spread throughout the entire world. It's one of the reasons we know that Jesus was not the Messiah, because this certainly did not come about. So this is the first of the proof texts in Matthew chapter 2, but we saw one last week in Matthew chapter 1, which was the virgin birth passage from Isaiah chapter 1, from Isaiah chapter 7. So we so far have in the book of Matthew 2 proof texts that he's trying to assert were fulfilled by Jesus, and at this point he's 0 for 2. In verse 7, Matthew goes on and says, "Then Herod, when he had secretly called the wise men, determined from them what time the star appeared. So he sent them to Bethlehem and said, 'Go and search carefully for the young child, and when you have found him, bring back word to me, that I may come and worship him also.'" And we read that and everyone says, "Yeah, right. It's exactly what Herod has in mind." So they heard the king. When they heard the king, when they departed, we're told that, "Behold, the star which they had seen in the east went before them, till it came and stood over where the young child was." And this is one of the most difficult passages in the Christian Bible to understand, because what exactly happened? Meaning that, was this an actual celestial star like we see up in the skies that moved somehow from the far east where they were, let's say in Babylon, and the star moved in the heavenly spheres, and it somehow was able to indicate to them a house in Bethlehem? Or did this star come down from the heavens and sort of travel, at about 25 feet in the air? and why didn't anyone else notice this? Meaning that it's just a very hard scene to imagine in your mind some star that is traveling, because if it's in the heavens, it wouldn't really show you where a particular house was.
Right.
And if it was closer to Earth, it would be something that the whole planet would be running around trying to follow this thing.
Right.
But anyway, the story has the star taking them to where the young child is. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceedingly great joy. And when they had come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary, his mother, and they fell down and worshipped him. Again, it doesn't seem to mean that they prayed to him like they would pray to God, but that they showed him respect. And then we're told they opened their treasures and they presented gifts to him: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Just what any 3-week-old baby would want. Of course, we know that it's very popular. People talk about the 3 wise men. Matthew never tells you how many wise men there are, how many magi there are. But traditionally, it's understood that there were 3 because there were 3 gifts here that are mentioned. And then we're told that they were divinely warned in a dream, these magi, that they should not go back to Herod. Don't go and tell Herod where the baby is. So they departed for their own country. They went another way. They went back to wherever they were from, Babylon or what have you. And now when they had departed, behold, an angel of the Lord, we're in verse 13 now, appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, look, arise, take the young child and his mother, flee to Egypt, and stay there until I bring you word. For Herod will seek the young child to destroy him, meaning that you got to get out of town because it's too hot here. We know that Herod is not interested in worshiping or paying any respect to the young Jesus. He wants to nip this messianic threat in the bud, and Herod is interested in actually killing Jesus. Now, what you see from this story is that Herod clearly did not have a Christian understanding of what the Messiah is, meaning that if the whole purpose of the Messiah coming was to die as a sacrifice, then it's hard to know why Herod would be so threatened by Jesus and why he'd be so interested in helping the cause by actually killing the child.
Right.
So it's very clear that the kind of Messiah that Herod understood was exactly the kind of Messiah that for thousands of years Jews have been waiting for, which is an earthly king who would rule over a restored utopian world of universal knowledge of God and universal peace. And that meant that if this king, this Messiah king, would really be the ruler of Israel, it mean he'd be thrown out, and that's why he was threatened. So it's very clear that the concept, the understanding of Messiah that Herod has is a very traditional Jewish concept of Messiah and nothing to do with what Christians understand as the Messianic vision, really. So what Joseph does in verse 14, he arose, he took the young child and his mother by night and departed for Egypt. And he was there until the death of Herod. So that makes sense. If Herod is the threat, so you get out of town until the threat is no longer there, until Herod dies. Now, what's important is that Matthew claims that this was not just a story that happened to take place. Matthew claims that all of this was preordained. It was all prophesied, that in the Hebrew scriptures, apparently what Matthew claims is that this whole episode of the Messiah having to go down to Egypt was predicted. It was a prophecy that was made, and Matthew's claiming that that prophecy was fulfilled when Jesus went down to Egypt. And he says here in verse 14 that all of this, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the Lord through the prophet, and this is the prophet Hosea chapter 11, saying, out of Egypt I've called my son. That's what Matthew quotes. Matthew says that Hosea prophesied that the Messiah would come out of Egypt. Now it's strange because Matthew is quoting this to speak about Jesus going down to Egypt, but as they always say about elevators, whatever goes down must go up too. So even though the verse that he quotes is talking about coming out of Egypt, Matthew speaks about this verse describing Jesus going down to Egypt. And again, the assertion that Matthew's making is that in the prophet Hosea, we have a prophecy about the Messiah going down to Egypt and coming out of Egypt. Out of Egypt I've called my son. Now, One problem here is that this story in Matthew conflicts with the story in Luke. And we'll see that when we study the Gospel of Luke. In the Gospel of Luke, there's no flight to Egypt. There's no story in the Gospel of Luke where Jesus is in great danger and he has to get out of Dodge and he has to go down to Egypt. The whole story is just not there. So we have really two different takes on what happened to the baby Jesus. Either he flees to Egypt, as we see in the book of Matthew, or he doesn't flee to Egypt in the book of Luke. But more importantly, this is totally not what the prophet Hosea was speaking about. What Matthew does very conveniently is he chops off the first part of the verse. He doesn't quote the entire verse from Hosea. He just conveniently skips the first half of the verse and only quotes the second half of the verse. Hosea says in the beginning of chapter 11, verse 1, when Israel was a child, I loved him, God says. When Israel was a child, I loved him. And then Hosea goes on to say, and out of Egypt I called my son. And people who might be surprised by the Bible speaking about Israel as God's son, because they may be preconditioned to only think about God having one son, that being Jesus. So the truth is that the Bible speaks about Israel, the Jewish people, being God's son. In Exodus chapter 4, verse 22, God tells Moses to say to Pharaoh, Israel is my son, my firstborn.
Right.
So this is not so strange. In Hosea, if you study the whole chapter 11 of Hosea, it's a story. It's a chapter about the history of the Jewish people. So what you have here really is Matthew co-opting. Matthew is really quoting this passage in Hosea out of context. The context has nothing to do with the Messiah going down to Egypt. The context, the actual passage in Hosea, is talking about the history of the Jewish people when, in the infancy of their history, in the very beginning of Jewish history, when they had to basically come out of Egypt as the birth of their nation. That's what Hosea is speaking about, the leaving of the Jewish people after their slavery in Egypt. And so really, this proof text is like cotton candy. You know, when you eat cotton candy, as soon as you put it into your mouth, it evaporates. It's not there. So when you examine these proof texts, we've been finding this to be the case with every single proof text we've studied so far with Jono. These are, generally speaking, none of them are real messianic prophecies. They are transformed into messianic prophecies by the gospel writers and by missionaries who find them as convenient hooks to point to Jesus, because in their mind these are verses that sound like Jesus, but they really are misrepresenting the original context of the Hebrew scriptures. So this is the second proof text in Matthew chapter 2. And we can now find the third one, because Herod, in verse 16, when he saw that he was deceived by the wise men, they gave him the slip. These wise men that he sent back to Bethlehem to find out which house, where the actual house is, where the child is born, they never came back to him. So what is he going to do? He was exceedingly angry. So he sent forth, I guess, a small, group of soldiers, a small, delegation of soldiers. And it says here that he put to death all the male children who were in Bethlehem and all of its districts, meaning all of the surrounding towns, from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had determined from the wise men. So he didn't know which child was this allegedly born Jewish Messiah. So in order to make sure that he gets this little baby, we're told that he kills every single male child under the age of 2 in the city of Bethlehem and all the surrounding cities. This is really strange, because had that actually happened, that would have been a very, very significant news story. A massacre like that, not just, someone who comes in and, kills 20 soldiers, someone who comes in and butchers actual infants, 2-year-old and under. People would have known about a story like that. That would have made the newspapers.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, what's strange is that Josephus, who writes a very, very detailed history of that time, I mean, he tells you what some of the Roman governors had for breakfast. Josephus doesn't mention, this incredible slaughter of all these children. Philo of Judea of Alexandria does not mention this. Tacitus, the Roman historian, doesn't mention it. It's nowhere mentioned in rabbinic sources in the Talmud. Actually, none of the other New Testament writers speak about this. Luke, Mark, John, Paul. Only Matthew writes about this alleged historical event. And so it doesn't really make us feel very confident that this is historical when there's literally no corroboration for this story, which really would have been a huge, huge story.
Right.
But aside from the fact that the actual story itself raises questions, Matthew again insists that this was not just some story that happened to take place. Matthew says it was all preordained, it was prophesied, and that in the Hebrew scriptures there was a prophecy that in the time of the Messiah there would be a massacre of infants. And he quotes in verse 17, "Then was fulfilled what was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet, saying," quote, "A voice was heard in Ramah, lamentation, weeping, and great mourning. Rachel weeping for her children, refusing to be comforted because they are no more." Now here, he's not doing what he did previously by only snipping part of the verse. Here he actually quotes the entire verse from Jeremiah chapter 31. And so you might think that maybe this actually does correspond. This verse in Jeremiah does correspond to what Matthew reports. The problem is that, again, they always say a passage that has no context is pretext, meaning if that you quote something out of context, it's really a pretext.
Sure.
There's really there's a statement in the Talmud, famous statement in the Talmud, which says that whenever people try to use the Hebrew scriptures to prove something that's not consistent with Judaism, with Torah, they said that the answer will be very close by. Meaning that the Talmud is saying that when people parachute down into the middle of a chapter in the Bible and try to snip out a sound bite to prove something, the Talmud says that usually you can show that there's a problem with their interpretation by just reading the surrounding verses. And so all you would need to do, I don't have my Hebrew scriptures in front of me, but if you just read the next verse in Jeremiah, the prophet tells Rachel, who's weeping, to stop weeping. Hold back your voice from weeping and your eyes from tearing, because Rachel is assured that these children that she's crying for will return from the land of the enemy. What we see in the book of Jeremiah is that Rachel was not weeping for children who were murdered and killed.
Okay.
She was weeping for children who were taken into exile. And so she is reassured that these children will come back from their exile. They're going to return to the land of Israel. So again, what you see here is that Matthew is co-opting, is really pulling a verse from the book of Jeremiah out of context and creating a messianic prophecy about it when it's not a prophecy about the Messiah. It's not telling us that when the Messiah comes, there will be a terrible massacre of children. That's simply not what Jeremiah is speaking about.
Okay. Got it.
So we'll finish up now.
That sounds good. That sounds good.
When Herod died, finally, now we're in verse 19. So when Herod died, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph, who was in Egypt. And he says, look, arise, take the young child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel. You can go back to Israel because the danger is past. The one who was threatening you was Herod. Herod's died. So go back to the land of Israel. For those who sought the young child's life are now dead. So in verse 21, we're told, then he arose, took the young child and his mother, and came into the land of Israel. So they returned to Israel because the danger is past. But in verse 22, he had heard, though, that Archelaus was reigning over Judea instead of his father Herod. So it's true, Herod had died, but Herod's son took over, and he was also a threat. So Joseph was afraid to go there, which makes sense. And he was warned by God in a dream, and he turned, therefore, he didn't go to Judea. He went to the region of the Galilee. He went north to northern Israel, to the Galil, and he came and dwelt in a city called Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophets, he shall be called a Nazarene.
This is the one I was waiting for.
Well, you may have to keep on waiting because there's no passage like that in the Hebrew Scriptures. So this is the third example, third time where Matthew appeals to the Hebrew Scriptures in chapter 2, which would make it 4 times so far, 4 times in 2 chapters, that Matthew insists that the infancy stories of Jesus were already foreordained, predicted in the Hebrew Scriptures. We've seen that the first 3 were basically totally without foundation. Isaiah was based upon a mistranslation. It was based upon a total stripping the passage out of its original context. The same with the passages from Hosea and Micah. Basically, he is engaging in the worst kind of proof texting, which is to really insist that a messianic prophecy has been fulfilled when he has not really appealed to an actual messianic prophecy. Here, it gets a little bit worse, because here he's saying that the move to the city of Nazareth, was also not happenstance. It wasn't just serendipity. It was already predicted, foreordained, prophesied in the Hebrew Scriptures that this Messiah would be called a Nazarene. And he'll be called a Nazarene because he grew up in the city of Nazareth. So the very obvious problem here, and this is one that Christian commentaries struggle with, is that there is no such passage anywhere in the Hebrew Bible. Actually, the city of Nazareth is never even mentioned in the Hebrew Bible. And certainly, we're never told that anyone will be called a Nazarene. And certainly, there's no passage which says the Messiah would be called a Nazarene, meaning that we have no such information from the Hebrew Scriptures that the Messiah would be someone who would come from the city of Nazareth or grow up in the city of Nazareth. Now, there have been several attempts to find a source for this. The cutest way of approaching it is to say that this was never a prophecy that was written down by the prophets. Matthew says it was a prophecy spoken by the prophets. I think the church lay would have said, "How convenient!"
How convenient!
We don't, exactly. We don't need to find a passage in the Scriptures. It was just something that the prophets said. Again, the question would be, why is it that only Matthew knows of this oral tradition, and no Jews had ever heard of such a oral tradition spoken by the prophets? It's also interesting, by the way, especially for Protestants who are sola scriptura, that it's only what the Bible says, that somehow we are happy here with somehow an oral tradition from the Bible, that something was spoken by the prophets. So that's one approach that's been taken, that they're not appealing to a verse in Scripture. It's just an oral tradition from the prophets.
Now, the argument that I kind of heard had to do with one says a Nazarene, and the other one is mentioning that he had taken a Nazirite vow.
Yeah, so some of the
there?
commentaries will take you to Judges chapter 13, I believe, which is the story of Samson. And they say that that's what Matthew is referring to here. Now, it's really hard to understand why anyone would take you to Judges 13, because it's clearly not about Jesus. It's clearly about Samson. And there's no ambiguity there. And also, the story of Samson is about someone who is a Nazir. A Nazarite is someone who abstains from wine, doesn't cut their hair, and doesn't come in contact with the dead for a particular period of time. But the problem is that a Nazir, a Nazarene, has nothing to do with someone who's from the city of Nazareth. Now, it's true that in English, when you write Nazareth with a Z, it sort of makes it a little bit easier to make that point.
Mm-hmm.
But the Hebrew word is spelled completely differently, meaning the city Nazareth would be spelled with a tzadi. In the English, you might write it as TZ. Nazareth, which is not Nazareth. So the reference to the person who becomes a Nazir, a Nazarene, just wouldn't help you here to show that the Messiah is supposed to come from the city of Nazareth. So again, there is a tremendous amount of anxiety to find some source for this quote that Matthew cites, but there really isn't any. And it's really sort of grasping for straws. So this is really the third passage in Matthew chapter 2, which is used to try to make the case that Jesus has very strong messianic credentials because he fulfilled prophecies from the Hebrew scriptures. And again, the one thing that all four of the prophecies have in common that we've looked at, especially the first three, which actually exist, is that none of them are really prophecies about the person of the Messiah. And we're going to see that that's going to be the repeated problem with virtually all of the so-called messianic prophecies that are marshaled on behalf of Jesus.
Interesting.
So that really takes us through the end of Matthew 2. And so next week, God willing,
yes,
we can begin chapter 3.
Yes, and you know what? That's really amazing. You did it. You did it, Rabbi. I tried to keep quiet as much as possible without inserts. And man, you covered it nice and solid. A lot of very, very more than just thought compelling and provocative problems throughout this so far. And again, we're only in chapter 2, so I can't wait to see what next week holds. Well, Rabbi, that was a great show. That was covered a lot of really juicy material. Thank you so much. Well, Rabbi, you can't see my daughter here yet, but I know once we're done, you'll be able to see the video and you'll see her sitting here patiently.
Well, we want to bring back the Holy Spirit now. So
yes,
do that. There we go.
Okay, hold on. I'm gonna turn her microphone up so she can talk. Okay, Sarah, give us a test.
Do you see the Holy Spirit?
Say something, Sarah.
Pretty much.
Okay, Rabbi, can you hear her okay?
I certainly can.
That means everyone else can too. Okay, we've got her a microphone and headphones too, so she's borrowing Pete's stuff. So okay, Sarah, since you have a microphone, you have a voice of your own. I will say that you're going to pick a number, and Rabbi Skobac is also going to pick a number. So we'll let you pick your number first, okay? And then we'll let Rabbi Skobac pick a number. Okay, and so I do have the list up. So let's see. You got to hold it here. I'll tell you what. Since you got a handful, y'all can just see how all this is in here. Looks like a big old. Looks like a bunch of sugar cubes. It's a bowl of wood. We're gonna make a wood pie, Rabbi.
Yeah.
Okay, so shake it. Okay,
shake
now Sarah, I want you to look at Rabbi Skobac. she didn't fall for that. She's looking at the monitor where we both can see you. Okay, actually that'll work. Okay, you look over here where Rabbi Skobac and his handsome smile is, and I'm gonna hold this in front of you, and you reach in and pick a number out of here. Just one. Go ahead, hurry. What number do you get?
7. Oh, 7.
7. Number 7. I gotta hide this bowl somewhere. Okay, let's see. Number 7. Just so y'all can see this. Both sides, no trick stuff going on here, except upside down. Okay, so there's number 7. Now, Rabbi, go ahead and just let that blue light shine. It was funny. It was really cool looking, actually. You guys didn't see it because it was actually during our test, but over this part, coming from this angle, was this really brilliant blue light reflection. It looks like he was standing at I don't know, somewhere where the stained glass or something was coming through. It was really amazing. And then he went and shut it all off, man. At our request, of course. But anyway, okay, Rabbi, have you got a number handy?
Well, I'm choosing something between 1 and 50.
Yes, 1 and 50 is going to be your only choices.
Okay, so let's go with 43.
Okay, scanning right now, 43 and 7. Okay, I'm looking. There's, let's see, 30. Okay, let me make sure that is what I'm looking at. Okay, I see one. There is a number 43, and there is a number 7. Now, I will tell you that I've seen some duplicate numbers listed and picked on here, and I don't babysit it because I don't have time to go in and edit it all the time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you the 2 that I found, but when I get home, I need to go and make sure that there isn't a duplicate, and if there is a duplicate, whoever actually picked the number first will be the winner. But right now, what I see is number 43, Heather, I'm just going to, I'll say Heather D, because I'm afraid I might mispronounce your last name. It's a pretty cool looking last name. De Oliveira.
Oh, hey.
That was pretty, I think that's probably good.
I was trying for that one.
De Oliveira. That's good. I like that. Okay, that's a pretty name anyway. Okay, so Heather, you have number 43. And then number 7, Priscilla Martell has got number 7. So we do have 2 winners. I need to write these down. 43 and 7. That's it, Rabbi. You picked a good number.
Okay.
You picked a good number. Well, Rabbi, I'll tell you what. I had so much fun. When I was walking over here tonight, I say walking because we're just like literally walking distance, so I don't drive over here so much. I was really pondering. I said, man, maybe I can just push Rabbi for an hour and a half and just see if he notices it. That would be great. I would push you for 2 hours if I thought you had time. It's just, it's so cool to be able to go through this. This is something I've always wanted to do, was to actually go through the New Testament with someone who wasn't actually on the New Testament side for a change. I
think we keep the program shorter. There's more of a chance people are going to watch it.
I think, yeah, they're going to watch the whole program if we keep it shorter.
I think that nowadays people, I think, are so stressed for time,
right?
That I think I'm happy to do something that's just under an hour. Would be great.
Yes, I agree.
Okay.
Well, Rabbi, thank you so much. It has just been such a wonderful night tonight, and I really appreciate your time. I'm gonna try to get your little ad up here. It is y'all need to go to JewsForJudaism.ca. Jews for Judaism Canada. Visit Rabbi Michael Skobac's work there, and tune in each week. We're gonna get all this covered. And until next week, you guys can go to www.tanaktalk.com, TENAKTLK.com. Subscribe to the website. You'll be able to get the emails and such. So, well, that's it for now. We are so excited to be here with you, and I can't wait until next week. So until then, shalom, shalom.
Shalom.
שיר ותוללה בשמחה שירו לנו משיר ציון איך נשיר את שיר השם על אדמת נחור אם אשכחך ירושלים תשכח ימיני תדבק לסודי נחיקי